challenge that is our mental health today. So for decades, the Gallup organization has been publishing this report. These are last year's numbers, this year's aren't out yet. Everybody that I know expects them to be worse than this. They are frightening. So, one of the questions that they asked in this report was, did you experience the following feelings during the majority of the day yesterday? Not accumulative, but check all the boxes that apply to you. 44% of workers globally said they felt stressed for most of the day before. 40% said they spent most of the day worrying. Those two are anxiety. Okay? 23% of workers said they were sad, and 21% outright angry. What's anxiety? An emotional response to a perceived threat that's not actually there. It is a narrative that this powerful processor that sits on top of your shoulders creates. What goes on up here absolutely affects everything below it. Globally, employee engagement and well-being remain low, and it's holding back potential that is enormous for both companies and individuals. LinkedIn did a study at the beginning of this year. 61% of US workers are likely to consider leaving their jobs during this calendar year. The US Task Force on Preventative Health Services last fall, at about this time, came out with a recommendation, listen carefully, that every adult in the United States under the age of 65 be regularly screened for anxiety. The CDC affirmed that earlier this year, saying they absolutely believe that the recommendation that was made last fall is one that should happen. So, now that we know the problem, if not you, likely a lot of people that you know, we're going to get into what's going to follow is kind of be a call and response. Dr. Michelle is going to talk to us about the science, and then Meg will give us some experiential tactics that you can actually walk out of here with. Thank you.
So, as Jennifer mentioned, one of the pieces that brings us here today is our shared concern about mental health. And my job as a neuropsychologist involves the opportunity to follow individuals over time and see how the behaviors that are set in motion or not set in motion impact brain functioning and emotional functioning years down the road. And so I want to share with you a couple of visuals to help you think about where we often end up in our brain when we are under the type of stress that Jennifer mentioned. And I want to also share with you a visual of what the solution to that stress can be. So how many of you, just by a show of hands, know what it feels like to be in the zone? And how would you describe it? You can just throw out a couple of words. How does your body feel and how are you thinking at those times? Calm, focused, calm, productive, proactive perhaps, right? Where you are kind of in command. I think of it as your inner CEO, your frontal lobes, are in full command of your cognitive machinery, right? That beautiful 3-pound gorgeous brain that you've got that is the super center of everything that you do. And that, you can imagine, is what the situation is on the left, right? We're in flow. And in fact, the psychologist that coined the phrase flow, he himself described it as a state of immersion where nothing else seems to matter, right? Time goes by quickly and we feel really productive. And again, the piece there that I want to hone in on is the word proactive, right? That idea that we are able to harness at our choice what we are going to focus on. Let's turn now to the situation that Jennifer mentioned and look at the brain on the right. And this is an innervation of what are the primal parts of the brain, the amygdala. How many of you have heard of the word amygdala, right? The fight or flight portion of our brain that lights up. So for example, if on the way here on your drive-in today, you saw a car in front of you with brake lights on, your body would immediately respond in a really helpful way, right? Your eyes would widen, your breath would start to become shallow, the blood would shunt to your muscles so that you would be able to respond really effectively and prioritize your own safety, right? That's great. That's a great response. But what if that response becomes chronic? What starts to happen in study after study is the frontal lobe, that inner CEO, that proactive CEO, detaches from the ability to control those more reptilian parts of the brain on the right. And when that happens, how is our decision making generally? I mean, what do you experience personally, just a couple of words, when you feel that you are not in flow?
Lack of focus.
Anxious, lack of focus, right? Scary, right? So we have words that we just voluntarily describe that are not only emotional, but also cognitive, right? We're aware of it. A lot of patients come into the office and they say, I just can't focus anymore. I just feel too overwhelmed. I feel like there's too much on my plate. I feel like there is just this overload of information, right? I'm trying to do too much. And so the question we have before us today is, how do we use multiple methods to bring ourselves into that state of flow more consistently? We are not always going to be able to do it. But if we can move the needle a little bit and move it more consistently, we're going to have some great exercises that Meg is going to share that are going to help you experience that today, right? The theme of today of this conference is, how do we take tools now in this moment and give you those, right? Arm you with those. So at 2 o'clock this afternoon, you can, embrace your meeting a little differently. So let's talk about a really interesting study. So there was a study of med students, really smart med students, who had this chronic stressor of an exam ahead of them, a month ahead of them, right? So they went into these brain scans and they showed that, again, that detachment from the frontal lobe and the reptilian part of the brain was happening. These smart students were not doing well, and they were also not scoring well on tests of attention. After the exam, does anybody want to guess what happened to the brain scans? They improved. Suddenly, the CEO was back in the driver's seat and able to command with flow again. These students, nothing changed but the deadline, right? Their brains functioned very differently based on how they looked at the situation. And I also want to share with you something that I think is maybe even a little more applicable to our daily lives. So how many times in the course of a day, in your jobs, in your leadership roles, as you are mentoring others, are you called upon to make novel decisions? Just by a show of hands, how many of you experience that a dozen times a day? Or 5 times a day, even, right? Even if it's a few times a day, imagine how much better you would feel if you felt nimble in those moments and you felt like you could apprise the information and flexibly make decisions. This is a novel study that showed the impact of stress on that nimbleness. So on the left, you're going to see a group of people who were taught how to navigate essentially through a virtual town, right? So they put everybody in front of a computer. These folks got really good at navigating these pathways through the virtual town. On the left, you're going to see folks who were asked to take a shortcut, and they were not experiencing any stress. They were very able to do that, versus those on the right who also navigated that virtual town, but were told to take a shortcut and were unable to do it. They went back into their autopilot roles. And that's exactly what happens to us under stress, right? You might say something that you don't even realize you've said. You might neglect to say something you meant to. It feels like pretty blurry and pretty fuzzy. So the question is, what is that impact of chronic stress on our brains? It is not just physical. As Jennifer mentioned, that anxiety is palpable, right? We need to be evaluating it more consistently. It is also cognitive. So one of the pieces that I work with most frequently are individuals who have memory problems or Alzheimer's disease. 10,000 individuals who were surveyed 13 years ago, those who had the highest levels of stress at midlife had a 50 to 65% higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease. So this is a serious situation that we all are blessed in a sense to be here talking about today, right? Because we can alter the trajectory of our cognitive functioning as well as our emotional functioning. And so we have a 3S strategy that we would like to empower you with today, so you can add it to your toolbox. This really goes across many different types of stress, intentionally giving you multiple strategies for each of those steps so that you can kind of choose, you can kind of get a sense of different options. And so we're going to talk about soothing as the first step. So imagine again those dueling brains we talked about. We want to talk about looking at that red side and soothing it so we can bring green back online. We're going to talk about the power of social support, which we've heard a lot about today. And we're also going to talk about the third step, which is strategizing, right? Getting the CEO back into the driver's seat to direct flow. We're going to turn to Meg first. She's going to help us right now in real time with Soothe.
Right, so I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm not here to sell yoga. How many of you have done yoga before? So what I love, look at that, that's amazing. Yoga is not for everyone. Yoga is a practice, a yoga mat, you have some fun clothing, it's fun to, take your shoes off. Yoga is also a state, and it's what Dr. Michelle mentioned, flow. So you can be a runner, a musician, a mathematician, you can take a yoga practice, and that state of flow, at least for me, is, wow, that was fast. A lost sense of time. But more importantly, what yoga has given us the tools, how to get out of our mind and to get into our body. We can talk a lot. We've had a lot of talking this morning, a lot of sitting this morning, and so we need tools to help us digest our food, but also what's in our mind. So what I'd like us to do in just a moment, we're going to do an activity. You can stand if you want, because we've been sitting for a very long time, or you can sit. But the first step is body scan. And you can do this at work, you can do this in bed when you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, anyone, right? You can do this before you go to bed, you can do this in the morning. To become aware of how are you, what do you need now? Once we find what we need, we can use the tools of breathing. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, increasing and lengthening our exhales can give us the soothe. So when you're ready, feel free to stand or to sit. We're going to take a moment. I wish we could dim the lights, give you some aromatherapy, but we can't. Just take a moment to get into your body. Knees bent a little bit, arms relaxed by your side, eyes soft or closed. Let's ground ourselves first by becoming aware of your feet. Notice the feet, the beautiful shoes you have on, the way you're standing. Notice if you're locking out your knees, so you can give a little bend. Our feet and our legs are our foundation connecting to the earth. And then as we move our awareness upwards to our pelvis, our pelvic bowl, this is the center. This is the place of balance. In our gut, what we feel and sense. Come up to your chest, your heart center, emotions. Notice the shoulders. See if you can relax the shoulders away from your ears. Let your arms be heavy, your fingers relaxed, no longer holding a phone. Notice your neck, your throat. Unclench your jaw. And then notice your skull. Think about softening the skull. Being open to hearing, learning. Then bring awareness to your natural breath. Feeling as you inhale the airflow in through your nose. And as you exhale, the breath flows out through your nose. And if you need a little help to connect with breath, put one hand on your solar plexus and one hand over your chest. Breathe into your hands. Take a big breath in. And a big breath out. We'll move into a breathing exercise that can be done for 5 to 10 rounds to soothe the nervous system, to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. Hands can stay where they're at, they can move in space, they can rest by your side. And I'll guide you. We're going to inhale in for a count of 4, and we'll be exhaling out for a count of 6. So wherever you are in your breath cycle, exhale out completely. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhale again, 2, 3. Deep inhale, 4. Exhale, let it go. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you take the lead. 2 rounds on your own. space of silence, stillness, awareness, we digest. The mind is fluid, let it flow. But check in now. What do you need? Physically, mentally, and emotionally. Let's release our hands, open our eyes. Let's take a big inhale, reach the arms all the way up. And exhale, find your hands at your center. You feel a little better? Thank you guys.
All right. Thank you so much. So as Meg just showed, and I'm actually just kidding, we do have more information. As Meg just showed us, that ability to control your nervous system is something that you possess innately. And experiencing that as a group has a power to it. Did you notice that? Did you notice did you hear us all kind of breathing in unison? There's something very powerful about that. And as Meg mentioned as well, that parasympathetic nervous system is one that we can actually invoke. It's sort of like turning a switch down, right? We're deciding to turn that dial of intensity down. Because when we move into fight or flight, what's really happening is the brain is innervating the adrenal glands, which secrete cortisol and adrenaline. And that's why your eyes get big and your muscles are ready to move, right? Because they've been turned onto that high power mode. And bringing them down allows you to then reflect, just like Meg showed us. So why is that really helpful? Because it sets the stage then for receptivity. And it also sets the stage for connection, new perspectives, and meaning. And that really dovetails beautifully with what we've learned today in so many of the sessions about social support and the impact of that, right? We kicked it off with Kathy Jacobson talking about how during COVID, she was connecting with other CEOs and recognizing that they had shared experiences that were really helpful to her. Then we heard from Julie Brandt about how she has also really relied on social support. We've heard about allyship, mentorship, your own personal board of directors, all kinds of great things. This is where it fits, here in the brain. And why that's helpful, because loneliness right now is an epidemic. And when we hear that we're not alone, and we hear that we have that shared overlap with others, there's something that kindles an awakening and a receptivity. And in order for us to move back into the strategic driver's seat as CEO, it often takes a literal perspective shift to allow that to occur. So now we've set the stage for that. We also can then express emotion more consistently, right? Because we're aware of it. We're more aware of it. And so Jennifer's going to take us through an exercise to assist us with the social support piece.
Just a little bit more science on this. How many of you have a person in your life that you could tell your deepest, darkest secret to? Raise your hands, please. Okay. How many of you engage with somebody that you trust every day in a meaningful way? Okay. Here's why this is important. There's you, there's me, and then there's us in the overlap. There's exactly two things that can happen here, and only two. Harm or healing. And by harm, I don't mean I'm cutting you, and by healing, I don't mean I'm putting a Band-Aid on you. But in this space, when we are together, if we're engaged in conversation, and I am paying attention to you, I'm not on my phone, I'm not looking to see who's coming and going, I'm here for you. You feel seen, you feel heard, and you feel like you matter to me. And that's what fills this up and allows us to have that stability. When I don't do that, and I'm on my phone and you're talking to me and I'm paying attention to who's in the door or who might be behind me or anything but you, I'm hurting you. And ultimately I'm hurting myself because we're all connected. And we live in this crazy busy world where we feel like we need to be connected all over all the time. But when you're in front of another human being, even if it's a cashier at a grocery store, You are either going to hurt that person or you're going to heal that person. And what you offer to that person is what's going to happen inside you.
So now that we've soothed, set the stage for receptivity to social support, let's see if we can urge ourselves back into that frontal lobe CEO position a little bit with a couple of other tools. And we're going to do a little bit of meditation after that. And
Well, we definitely can. Adding into just mindfulness, listening is mindfulness.
Yes.
Listening to our conversations, being present is mindfulness. But we'll end with the meditation.
perfect. So one of the pieces that I also wanted to share with you as we look at options for as we wrap up is the idea that when we move into strategy formation, what we're talking about is using tools that allow us to problem solve. Number one amongst those is reflection. So, for example, I have a notebook full of probably like 10 pages of notes from this morning, and I probably am not going to have time to reflect on that and how that is going to potentially change my actions in the future unless I intentionally set that time aside, which is pretty tough to do, right? But I want to share with you a couple of tools that can help with that. So paradoxically, the idea of what we call an exercise snack. How many of you have heard of the concept of an exercise snack? It is basically like a 5 to 10 minute boost of cardio, or it can be any type of exercise that gets your heart rate up, that creates that sense of receptivity to strategy formation. And so paradoxically, using it before a big talk, using it before you go into a big meeting where you really need to be cognitively nimble, can actually help with your strategy formation. It increases blood flow to those frontal areas and to the white matter tracts that underlie it. So essentially what you're doing is you're creating again, a receptivity to becoming that inner CEO again and aligning those resources. There's also something called a done list. How many of you have heard of the done list before? Okay, this is one of my favorite techniques. When everything is coming in, so much so that it's taking you away over and over from the things that you intended to do, instead of not being able to check off what needs to be done, create a new list, which is the things you have done. Because a lot of times at the end of the day or at the end of a morning, if you look at that, you have a new sense of appreciation for all of those things that came up, and it gives you a little bit of a boost. It also helps you then strategize and get back into that CEO position, because you can analyze exactly what you have done instead of what you intended to do and make decisions about that. So one of the other pieces that is really important is the idea of a behavioral experiment, okay? A behavioral experiment is something that you do based on your reflections that you think is going to work for you, but you're not sure. And so it could be, for example, trying out a new communication technique that we've learned about today. It can be trying out some of the strategies that you just saw Meg do. Any of those pieces, the question is, how does it fit for you? As we've all seen, there is no one recipe that fits for everybody. So feeling free to conduct these behavioral experiments and go, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, and know that there is no one answer, of course. That's why we're giving you this toolbox in a sense. Engaging in neuroprotective habits. So there are 5 basic habits that we know really set your brain up for success in the future. I actually have a book here, and if anybody's interested, I have a few copies at the back, called High Octane Brain. And this is basically uses what we call an EXCELS method, EXCELS, to highlight the 5 most neuroprotective methods, exercise being fundamental to them. The EX is exercise, C for consume healthy foods, E for engaging in learning, L for lowering stress as we're doing today, and then S is for sleep, dear sleep, which we all need more of course. Self-leadership then, I like that term because it helps us conceptualize what our goal is in terms of moving into that CEO role. We are trying to take our leadership that we hone so well for others and for our teams and turn it to the self. And when we think of ourselves as engaging in self-leadership, I don't know how that makes you feel, but for me it makes me think differently about the things that I do or don't do. So let's turn to Meg, and she's going to take us to a step here.
Meditate.
Meditate before we open it up for some questions.
How many of you have meditated before? How many of you said, it's not my personality to meditate? There's no way I can, yeah, raise your hand. I was birthed into a family of hippies, and so I started meditating when I was 5. So I take it for granted on how easy it is. I share meditation at my yoga studio, and the common complaint is, my mind won't quiet. It's okay. The mind only quiets when you're dead. So, thoughts are going to happen. If that's what's getting you, is that we're trying to be type A, succeed at meditation. We see these pictures, in the movies, it's like the Zen, we're in a cave and all of that. No. Meditation is a way and there's so many different techniques, so it's about finding the right technique for you. Try them all. So I have a simple one, and everything today that we're offering you will be emailed to you, the PDFs, and then some different mindfulness, the body scan, the breath work, and the meditations. 5 minutes is all you need. And so we're going to take 5, maybe a little less than 5 minutes. And I'll just walk you through some stages. I sometimes see it as a way, if you think about old school filing cabinet, in the morning or in the evening, it's like you're taking these different thoughts and putting them in the right file. Like, I don't need to worry about that anymore, or I'll take care of that tomorrow. You're sort of categorizing your thoughts. And then in a moment, and sometimes, but don't have expectations for it, you might experience what we say, that flow state. And that flow state might be just a second or two, where all of a sudden you're not hearing the children or the dog. You have transcended into this state of meditation. As soon as you experience that transcendence, that state of just peace, you now want that in every experience, right? And that attachment is what causes the suffering in meditation. So we're going to begin by just letting go of any expectations, and whatever arises for you today, be okay with that. So sit comfortably, hands in the lap. Eyes can be soft or closed. And let's just begin observing the sounds that you can hear in this room. Notice how quickly your attention goes to sound. Now from our outward awareness, feel and sense the body, how you're sitting. Make little adjustments. We've been sitting a lot today, so if you need to adjust, find some ease. That's how your clothing lies on the body. And now bring your awareness to your headspace, your mind, your thoughts. Interesting, when you start to observe your thoughts, they become quiet. Just observe what's on your mind. From the sounds of the room, the sensations of the body, and the thoughts, we call these distractions from the practice of meditation. So we use tools, and the simplest tool to help us avoid distraction is our breath. So feel and sense your breath. Feel the inhale. And feel your exhale. And if all you were to do was to spend a minute observing your breath, that would be meditation. It's a simple meditation that we can all practice, and it's called gratitude. I'd like you to think in your memory of something you are very grateful for. A time when you experienced joy, gratitude. See it in your mind's eye. Can you embody that feeling? Bring that sense of gratitude into your heart. Breathe into your heart. And allow that sense of gratitude now to move throughout your whole body. From your whole body, let it extend out of your body to the peers around you in this room. Your loved ones. And perhaps you're even ones you have conflict with. Can you extend the sense of gratitude out and beyond? Bring yourself back to your center. Feel gratitude for this day, for coming here, connecting with others, taking in all of this information. Be patient with yourself as you digest this information. And then we'll close with one audible breath through our mouth. So take a deep inhale in through your nose. Open your mouth, exhale. Eyes can open. And so after you take as much time as you want to meditate, you can see it in your faces. Everyone looks calmer. It's a great time to journal, to take a cup of tea, not to pick up the phone right away, but to transition slowly. So that was literally 2 minutes, and I hope you felt the difference. And I hope you can integrate it whenever it works in your day.
Thanks, Meg. Okay, what are you curious about? Yes.
Okay, so I'm obviously very young, and one thing that I exhibit, that I've been exhibiting for quite a while is, so I do HR, so I deal with people all day, so I talk to people all day. I get home, sit on the couch, and it's so hard to get the hell back off the couch. I'll sit there and I'll think about everything I gotta do, the dishes, pay bills, whatever the hell. I'll sit there and I'll think about it for hours, but I can't get myself to just get the hell and just go do it. What are some recommendations maybe for that? I don't know if it's a routine change or...
So, that's a great question, by the way. What causes you to sit on the couch?
I feel like because I feel that I deserve to relax.
Okay,
And then I feel almost guilty maybe for relaxing.
sure. So I think that's we can all substitute couch for anything that we all experience, right? Because you do deserve to relax, especially after a long day. I think the key is maybe thinking about conducting a behavioral experiment, right? And maybe asking yourself, are there other things that you find relaxing, but maybe also semi-rejuvenating at the same time? So, for example, the meditation that Meg just led us through, did you feel like that relaxed you?
Yeah, and then it made me want to go to the gym.
Okay, so that's a perfect example of that sweet spot of being relaxed, yet also feeling that buoyancy of rejuvenation. And the beautiful thing about that, as Meg mentioned, is you can do it anywhere, right? And it doesn't have to be that textbook definition, that we all think about. So I would invite you to think about that combination of relaxing and rejuvenating. There's also something that we call behavioral activation. It's similar to the Pomodoro principle that was talked about earlier, which is basically do 30 seconds. Just make yourself do 30 seconds of an activity, even though you really might not want to. It's this idea that we call action precedes motivation. Oftentimes we expect to feel motivated to do something, and it really is the flip of that that makes us move into action. But I think it's a great question, because we always want to look at what it was that led you to be on the couch, and it's that rightful need to relax. And so see if you can substitute for something that's enervating as well.
Not just a great question, but a really brave question.
Yes.
What else are we curious about? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. For people that have experienced long-term levels of stress, and if there's is there a way for them to either be tested or to see some sort of feedback on how that stress has affected them over the years, and maybe ways in which they can reverse those effects if possible?
Yeah. So one of the ways that we use is self-report questionnaires. So there are a number of questionnaires that you can complete that quantify the level of chronic stress. In terms of reversing it, the good news is it can be reversed fairly quickly with a lot of these techniques. And you may be able to speak to seeing that in practice.
Definitely. Well, I want to actually add back to the first question. Social. have a buddy that will go for a walk with you or go to a yoga class or someplace, and right from work, go to the gym or go someplace. So I wanted to add that. And then wearables. I'm an Oregon, and this has changed my life, watching my sleep, because sleep is so important. But it tells me also I'm not under a lot of stress at times. I wake up and I joke to my husband, my brain just yelled at me. It told me to go back to bed because it was my level of stress that we actually don't realize. And so these trackable wearables, the science is incredible because it regulates monitors our heart rate variability, and it's been a game changer for me.
Thank you.
What else are we curious about? Come on. Nobody? Yes.
How would you, or what suggestions would you have for handling situations that are triggers of stress, but you can't necessarily control them? Maybe you have those responsibilities in life that you can't get away from. You have a family member that you're taking care of, or you have children, right? And you have those responsibilities, and it's like control what you can control, but what if you can't? Because you are that person that has to take on that responsibility or that task, and you don't have to way out because you can't really set a boundary. What do you do then to help with that stress?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So there is Jill Bolte Taylor is a neuroscientist. She's a neuroanatomist. So she understands how the brain works, and she had a stroke. And she understood exactly what was happening to her as she's living through the stroke. And she ended up writing a book. And part of the research after that was to understand how long a trigger lasts in your body, physiologically from a scientific perspective. 90 seconds. Which seems crazy, right? You get mad, you get triggered, and it seems like it goes on for hours, days sometimes, right? So I, 4 years ago, in 3 months, suffered 3 huge traumas that broke me. And part of my healing landed me doing the work that I do today. But one of the techniques that I use is I made this necklace, but you can use anything. Touch, when you feel triggered, touch something. Ground yourself in something and try to do any of the breathing that Meg recommended to you. And then start to tell your brain this. It'll do what you say if you tell it. So I tell my brain, Jen, I know you can't see yourself to the other side of this right now, but I do know that science says if you keep breathing for 90 seconds, it's going to be over. And it ends. And you move on. So find something that you wear all the time, or start to wear something that has meaning for you. This has a lot of meaning for me. And no one knows I'm doing it, right? I touch my necklace. Women touch jewelry all the time. Nobody knows that what's happening to me. But the minute I feel it, I go to this, and I just start talking to myself in my quiet voice, just got to keep breathing for 90 seconds, and we're going to get through this. It's one of the most effective techniques that I found, and I spent months triggered. So it really helped me through it.
Can you repeat the name of the book? My Stroke of Insight. My Stroke of Insight.
Dr. Jill Bolte, B-O-L-T-E, Taylor. Thank you.
She has a TED Talk, doesn't she?
I'm sure.
She does.
Yeah, and recently written another.
Yeah, fascinating.
And that's what the tools in yoga, the science is that you can't think when you feel. So if you're touching something, if you're focusing on feeling your breath, if you do a body scan, feel my toes, feel my hands, it'll take you out of that, because when you feel, you can't think. Try it, it's great.
What else are we curious about? Yes.
So going back to the first question, I actually have the opposite problem. I can't get myself to relax or calm down. I constantly feel like I need to be doing something, whether it's cooking dinner, dishes, laundry, just cleaning in general, or gardening. I can't find that sense of calm to get myself to just sit.
Well, I think that is kind of an epidemic these days, to tell you the truth. I'm seeing pretty much everybody's head nodding, including mine. I think that there has to be a conscious decision to understand the benefits of relaxation and creating boundary around self-care. And sometimes I benefit by making it kind of an extreme case in the other direction. Like I say, I could read like 20 more books, in the next week, but I wouldn't be able to stop, and take a breath if I were to do that. And so you can kind of work backwards from that and say, I don't really need to do all of those things. I can take it back a step and a step. In other words, we can always be overstimulated if we made that choice to do so. So I think it's talks like this that help recenter us and refocus us on the importance and the costs of not taking that time. It's always easier said than done, but hopefully what we've imparted today is these strategies can be used in the moment. And we don't need to be, out of our environment. You can do these things at work. And I do believe too that once you start to see the benefits happen, that a positive ripple effect can occur where you start to miss it if it's not there. And that's, you kind of have to get hooked in little bursts first, but I think trying it in little segments is probably the easiest way if we want to think about bite-sized pieces to relaxation.
Well, I think it's also our family story. Would you say, are you lacking self-care? Are you taking time to take care of yourself or not?
I've always done wanting to take care of others before myself.
So we know that, so how can we integrate in the day? And maybe it's going to a class or going to do something. If you're not one that can sit still, then doing something, mindful walking, getting out into nature, taking time to go social and have a cup of coffee with a girlfriend, right? Because I know that feeling of doing. It's hard to get off that roller coaster, but making sure that you take care of yourself.
And that's where the step 3 of the strategizing, which is exactly what you're doing now, comes into play, right? Because you realize the disconnect between what you're doing and what you want to do. And then you've got that open position to strategize.
So at least 2 more questions in the middle and then 1 in the back. Yeah.
Just to schedule that, right? You can say all day long, like, oh, meditate to this, but you really have to schedule it and make that a priority, and you're actually going to do it, otherwise you're going to continue every day doing what you're doing.
Thank you. It's a great point. So I'm on my own calendar, and I'm happy to show it to you after 8 times a day. 5 of those things included what Dr. Michelle said about making sure that my body is where it needs to be to do the work I can, and then there are other things that I do. And so it's a really great point. But literally, I'm on my own calendar, and it's not negotiable. In the back, there was a question?
Yes, everything we've been talking about thus far, busy is seen as kind of a badge of honor. And so it's almost countercultural to say, yes, I'm actually going to take care of myself, and self-care not being, we always see it too, which is just, I think a glass of wine and all of that, which may or may not be realistic for you. When we're trying to fight against this idea of busy is important, busy is meaningful, how do you flip the script, essentially?
I don't think it happens that fast. I think, when our default is busy, it takes a while to unwind. So my life changed abruptly in April of 2019, and I will tell you 4 years later, a little bit more than 4 years, I'm finally in a place that I want to be in.
I think so.
Baby steps.
Yeah, Jennifer, I think what you just said is key, that what place you want to be in, right? It goes back to that idea of flow, and even if you have little bites of it, you know that difference. And so trying to create space to have even just little more bite-sized elements can be helpful. But it's also helpful to realize that, like you said, busyness as a badge of honor is misleading. Multitasking being effective is a myth. It actually is counterproductive in many situations to multitask. It's also not very productive for us to not be in flow, right? Because that's when the creativity comes. That's when we can do so much more in flow than we can scattered. And so if we fight those thoughts that busyness is a badge of honor and counter them with what we're talking about today, that can be a first step.
There's a great book out by Rick Rubin. I don't know if you know him, but he is a famous person who has worked with any musician that you've heard of in your lifetime. He's been meditating since he was 14, and he wrote a book about creativity. He thought he was going to write a book to tell people how to create art, and he ended up writing a book to tell people how to create their lives. And so, given your question, Dan Harris does a podcast called 10% Happier, and he's recently interviewed Rick, and I've listened to it 4 times now. So if you want a quick overview or like cheater notes, try the podcast. Yes?
Just one really quick question.
Yeah.
What are the 5 things on your calendar? I'm just so curious. Like, is it like meditate? cook
Sure.
yourself?
So I begin every day with a grounding practice that includes movement, Qigong. It includes creativity. I take colored pencils and I draw. I read Eastern and Western theology. I honor my ancestors. And then that ends, and then I exercise. I exercise 7 days a week. I then take a cold shower. Don't just start doing any of this stuff without thinking about it or talking to a doctor. It's taken me 2 years to work up to the only time I turn on hot water anymore is the day that I'm going to shave. Outside of that, I don't turn on the hot water in the shower. Nutrition. I am time outside. Most psychotherapists will tell you that one of the most powerful tools that we have available to us is just getting outside. So I spend at least a half an hour outside every day. I spend a half an hour every day connected to somebody that either I'm close to, like I asked that question for you, or that provokes thought in me, who challenges me, where I'm educating, I'm learning. At the end of the day, I reconnect to myself, and then I am militant about my sleep. I am in bed by 8:30, I'm lights out by 8:45, and I get 8 hours of sleep a night.
So if that overwhelmed anybody?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Take one tool today, take one tool and try to integrate it in 30 days. One tool.
Yeah, don't try to do it all. Yes, great point, Meg.
I don't have a question, I just wanted to add something but to yours. So I asked the question about I get home and I don't want to do anything. I used to be on the opposite side where I couldn't relax. And so one thing that my therapist told me is pay attention to your environment. Because the reason I sometimes felt that I couldn't relax is because the partner I was with wasn't helping me, and I felt guilty asking for the help because the response I received was always negative. Then I was single for a while, figure out my life, and I'm with a partner where if I take out the trash, he's already put the trash bag back in. So I have that same environment to actually be able to relax. Maybe a little bit too much, I take advantage of it, but one piece of advice that she gave me, because I said that same exact question, and she said, what's your environment like? And then the tears flooded, and I realized, shit, like that is a big part of it. So just one piece, and it actually changed my life. So I just wanted to pass that along.
Anything else? Well, yes.
If you were in a role or position where you're constantly like fielding other people's complaints or issues or problems, what strategies do you have to block like internalizing that and taking on the negativity on your own?
I'll refer back to what Dr. Michelle said. If I don't do those 8 things, I call myself an emotional guy. I can't show up. So the only way for me to know how to set the boundaries is to first take care of myself.
I think that's really wise. I think creating conscious creation of the space to do so. And I hope what you all leave here with today is it doesn't take much time. We know you're super busy, right? We're all super busy. So even if it is a minute in the car, in the midst before a meeting, anytime you can punctuate that type of relaxation perspective taking into your day is good. And then maybe upon reflection, you'll think, do I want to spend my day taking, complaints? So that's when we start thinking about strategies.
She did not just tell you to do that.